Do you have any interesting interview stories? Any epic fails from either side of the desk, that is, being interviewed or as the interviewer? I have a story that wasn't exactly an epic fail, but it still haunts me. This happened when I was finishing my doctorate and I was looking for a faculty position. I was in my early 30s, super keen and extremely well prepared for my first round interviews, all of which happened back to back at a conference hotel. It was quite efficient, actually. And I was generally successful at turning most of my first round interviews into second round invitations for school visits. But there were a few exceptions when I was not successful. And it was one of those unsuccessful interviews that still haunts me. This particular interview was for a state school in the US. And I remember walking into the interview room where two middle-aged white men sat and looked at me. They didn't even stand up to shake my hand. And then they turned to each other and they rolled their eyes. And then they told me to take a seat. And right away I was wondering, what is going on? Why are they looking at each other like that? And then one of them said, "You probably wouldn't accept a job here anyway, but why don't you tell us about yourself? And also explain to us why you'd want a job at this school." Aha, I told myself, it was the H-bomb. That's what we call it when the Harvard credential backfires. In retrospect, I should have thanked them and walked out. But I stayed for my 45 minutes and I let them grill me. It was torture. Have you ever wished that you had the guts to walk out of a job interview? That's pretty extreme, walking out of an interview. In fact, when I think about it, I probably did the right thing by staying. Imagine if later these two men met with other faculty members from other schools and then they ended up telling them that I walked out. That would not be good. Anyway, I still think about that experience. It was intense. Probably my worst interview experience ever. I knew from the get-go that the interviewers didn't like me before I even opened my mouth. Here's the thing. Even when the interviewer wants to give you the job, interviewing can be very anxiety-inducing, can't it? So, in this podcast episode, you are going to learn 4 things. Yeah, I know. I am digressing from my usual power of 3. There are 4 things. 1, your preparation before the interview. 2, your communication during the interview. 3, what to do after the interview. And I'm going to teach you how to answer specific interview questions. Are you ready?
Let's do this. Let's talk about talk.
Hey there, I'm Dr. ANDREA Wojnicki. Please call me Andrea. And yes, my voice usually does not sound like this. I have a bit of a cold, but guess what? The show must go on. I'm a pro. I coach ambitious executives like you to communicate with confidence and credibility. I hope you'll check out the talkabouttalk.com website to learn more about me and what I do, including one-on-one coaching, corporate workshops, and lots more. If you know me, or if you've ever listened to a Talk About Talk podcast episode before, you know that I am laser focused on communication skills. Not life skills, not time management skills, it's all communication skills. Lately, a lot of folks in career transition have been asking me about interviewing skills. Can I help you with that? Yes, I can. Nailing your job interview is all about communication. In order to succeed in your job interview, you need to confidently communicate your true and your best self to the interviewer. My suggestion is that you tackle your interview preparation systematically, focusing on these 4 things. 1, your preparation before the interview. 2, your communication during the interview. 3, what to do after the interview. And 4, how to answer specific questions. That is a lot to track. Am I right? It is. So, I created a helpful checklist that you can download right now for free. You can find it at talkabouttalk.com/interview or by clicking on the link in the show notes. Now's your chance. Just press pause and print the checklist. Or if you're in your car or out for a walk, you can listen now and then print and review the checklist later. Again, you can find it at talkabouttalk.com/interview. Okay, before I go any further, there is one more thing to prepare in advance of your interview, and that is your confidence, managing your nerves. I will not be talking about confidence here in this episode because there are several other Talk About Talk podcast episodes that focus on exactly that. Those episodes are listed for you in the show notes. And again, you'll also find the link to our summary checklist for this episode there. Just go to talkabouttalk.com/interview. Let's get into this. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see right now that I actually have the 2-page summary checklist right in front of me, and I'm going to be referencing that, and I'm going to be taking you through line by line. So again, if you want to print the checklist, go to talkabouttalk.com/interview. And if you're driving your car or if you're going for a walk, listen in, and then you can print and review the checklist later. All right, the first part of the checklist is how to prepare before the interview. My first suggestion for you is that you do some research and you focus that research on 4 different things. You focus it on the interviewer or interviewers, so the people or person who's interviewing you. You focus it on the position, in other words, the job description, exactly what the job is. The third thing is the firm. And the fourth thing to research is the industry. Now, given these 4 things, the interviewer, the position, the firm, and the industry, you may be very familiar with 1 or 2 of these things and less familiar with the others. So obviously that's going to affect what research you do. But the other thing I want to point out here is with regards to each of these 4 things, your research is going to help you prepare, feel confident, be more informed about your interview and how you answer questions. It also can help you in terms of informing the questions that you want to ask at the end of the interview. You know, when they say, do you have any questions for us? You've done this systematic research and you will come up with questions. So that's a great place to start. Okay, the second thing to do in advance is to do your personal branding work. So if you've ever listened to a Talk About Talk podcast, you probably have some idea what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about specifically for your interview, identifying 3 unique strengths. 3 unique strengths that you are bringing to the conversation and to this role. These would be your answer to the 3 reasons why you should hire me. The next thing that you want to do is to prepare about 2 stories. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3 stories, but I'm going to say prepare about 2 stories that reinforce each of these 3 strengths. So I've actually worked on this with a couple of my clients who are in the middle of job interviewing, and we identify what their 3 strengths are on a sheet of paper. We create a matrix, and then we have 2 stories. So you end up with 6 stories altogether that illustrate your 3 main strengths. You got that? The last thing you want to do in advance of preparing for your interview that I have here on the checklist is to practice answering interview questions using frameworks, not scripts. So I want to be really crystal clear here. I am not talking about memorizing a script. I'm not talking about memorizing your answers. I am talking about doing the work to think about, like I just said, what are your main strengths? What are the stories that you want to tell? And then what are the frameworks that you're going to use to answer the questions? And I'm going to get into that in a minute, but I just wanted to make that crystal clear. So before the interview, you've got your research in the 4 different areas that I listed. You're working on your personal brand and your 3 main strengths, and then you're identifying stories, and you're committing to remembering what your strengths are, what your stories are, and answering questions in frameworks. Let's move on to during the interview. Before we get into actually what the questions are, when you're in the interview, my first suggestion is something that I am very passionate about because I've read the research. You may have heard me say this before in a different episode. Enthusiastic candidates get job offers. So walk in with a big smile on your face. Make sure that your body language, your words, and your tone convey enthusiasm. Got it? Okay. The second thing is to be precise but not evasive with your answers. So what do I mean by this? It means seeking a balance between communicating with precision and not rambling. So my suggestion is to keep your answers focused, but to say, you can say it explicitly, I'm happy to elaborate, right? Never say, I don't know, or never give one-word answers. Be concise and brief and focused, and then say, I'm happy to elaborate. One of the reasons for this actually is in the next point here on our checklist, which is getting the interviewer to talk. There's also research that shows the more the interviewer talks, you can think of it as tracking the ratio. The higher the ratio of the interviewer talking versus you talking, the more likely you are to get the job. Now, of course, you can go over with this, and if the interviewer even gets a hint of a suggestion that you're being evasive, this will backfire. But I don't think you're going to do that, right? You know that you need to be clear and complete in your answers, but you really want to get the interviewer talking. What you're trying to do here is establish a connection with the interviewer. Okay, the next thing on during the interview in our checklist here is clarify how your previous experience qualifies you for this position. It could be your industry that you worked in and the number of years that you did that. It could be the size of the P&L you managed. It could be the number of people you led. I want you to think very clearly and to distinguish between the baseline table stakes that qualify for you for the job. This would be the things that I just mentioned, your industry experience, your P&L that you managed, the number of people that you led, and so on. And then I want you to think separately about your superpowers, the things that are going to help you knock it out of the park when it comes to this job, okay? The next suggestion here for during the interview is to focus on the impact that you made, specifically how in your past job you made money, saved money, or solved a problem. I also want you to ask questions based on the research that you did before the interview. This is like an easy one. If you do the research in those 4 areas, in the interviewer, the position, the firm, and the industry, you're going to come up with some great questions. And then the last point that I'm going to make here during the interview is when they ask, is there anything else you want to add, or is there anything else you want to ask? This is your chance to really put the icing on the cake or the cherry on the sundae, whatever the metaphor is. You're going to close really strongly here. This is where all of your work on your personal branding will come through. You want to conclude with an enthusiastic comment that highlights 2 things: your enthusiasm for the job, and secondly, your unique strengths. So you could say, I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear here, and that when I leave the room, you understand 2 things. 1, I'm very enthusiastic about this position, and 2, the things that differentiate me compared to other candidates for this position are, and then you list your unique strengths. Okay? All right, so those are my guidelines for during the interview, but we haven't yet talked about how to answer the questions. So in the checklist, I have outlined 1, 2, 3, 4 different common questions along with suggestions for how you answer them. So the questions are, tell me about yourself. The second one is, tell me about a time, the classic behavior description questions. The third one is, why are you the best candidate, or why should we hire you? And then the last one is the infamous, what areas of development are you working on, or what are your weaknesses? All right, so I'm going to take you through my suggestions for how to answer each of these. The first one is, tell me about yourself. So if you've ever listened to a Talk About Talk podcast or attended a free live training or one of my boot camps, you might guess where I'm going to go with this one. Use the 3-point self-introduction framework. And then you elaborate on each of the 3 points. So the 3 points in the self-introduction framework are present, past, future. When they say, tell me about yourself, your inclination might be to start with the past and tell them this chronological story about your corporate biography, everything that you've done. No, anchor them in the present. Tell them who you are, what you do, what your strengths are, what your leadership style is. Start with the present. Then you go to the past. This is where you establish credibility by highlighting 2 or 3 things that are relevant for the job that you're applying for, right? It could be a position that you had, it could be credentials that you've earned, it could be awards that you've won, it could be projects that you've led. Then you conclude with a future-oriented statement that is enthusiastic about the job. This is super easy. You could say, and I'm really excited to learn more about this position because I have a feeling that I've got what it takes. Got it? So that's the first question. Tell me about yourself. You go present, past, future. And of course, you can say, I'm happy to elaborate on any of the things that I've mentioned here. You don't want to seem evasive, but you also don't want to go rambling on. Okay? So that's the first question. The second type of question that I'm going to share my advice for you on is the tell me about a time or give me an example of when you. So these are called behavior description questions. And the idea is the reason why an interviewer would ask you a question like this is because they're wondering what you are going to do in the future when you get the job. And they're making the prediction that your future behavior is based on your past behavior. There is a beautiful framework that is, it's not my framework. It's a very commonly known framework. In fact, most interviewers probably know this framework. It's called the STAR method of answering behavior description questions. It's 4 things, STAR. S is situation. So here's where you describe the context. How long ago was this? Where were you geographically, at what company, and what was going on? The second, T, is task. This is where you describe your challenge. Third, A, is action. Tell them what you did. And then the fourth step is R, tell them the results. Ideally, you're sharing the quantifiable impact that your actions resulted in. So this is a really easy one. And remember when I said it at the beginning, I want you to practice telling 2 stories for every one of your strengths, every one of your 3 strengths that you've outlined. You need to use the STAR method. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. Got it? Okay. The third type of question is the why are you the best candidate or why should we hire you question. This is where you have the opportunity to reinforce your personal brand. This is where you bring up all your hard work in identifying your 3 key weaknesses. So again, I want to be really clear here. There is definitely an advantage to thinking about the baseline skills and experiences that they're looking for separately from your unique strengths that are going to help you knock it out of the park. So baseline skills highlight how you are qualified. Consider the requirements from the job posting. You can read those, right? From the research that you've done and based on the conversation that you've been having with the interviewer. So get specific and reinforce how you meet these baseline standards and then get into your unique strengths. These are the things that differentiate you relative to other job candidates. All right. The last question is, what areas of development are you working on or what are your weaknesses? I know that the answers to this question can be so comical that they've basically become meme worthy. It's like, well, my biggest challenge is that I work too hard or that people like me so much. Like, it's come on. I have a different suggestion for you. I hope that you do not respond to this question with something that is meme worthy. Rather, my suggestion to you is that you think in advance about a couple of the things that you are working on and then answer this question truthfully by identifying one of those things. And I want to encourage you to demonstrate 2 things. You're demonstrating self-awareness and you're also demonstrating your growth mindset, your focus on improvement. And you can do this implicitly by saying, I've noticed that when I do this, blah, 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 or I'm taking into account this feedback, right? So you're demonstrating self-awareness. And then you can communicate your growth mindset implicitly by saying that you're working on things. You can also use the terms self-awareness and growth mindset explicitly if you want to make sure you're really hammering on those 2 points, which by the way, can be a great advantage for you. Now, Here's the bonus question that I suggest you prepare in advance. In addition to these 4 typical questions, I want you to think really hard about that one question that you are terrified of answering, And I want you to prepare your answer to that question in advance. Again, you're not memorizing it. It's not a script, but I want you to practice answering the question that terrifies you more than any other. Why? I used to do this and I know that it works. If you can answer that most terrifying question, you can answer anything. There is some chance that that question might come up, but even if it doesn't, you're going to be hearing some questions that you probably didn't anticipate, but none of them are going to be as terrifying as this question. And you know you can answer this question, so you can answer anything. Again, just do this as a confidence booster, okay? All right, finishing off this checklist, the last part is what to do after the interview. Most of this should be pretty common sense, but I've got 3 suggestions for you, or 3 comments for you. So the first one is to follow up with a thank you email immediately, ideally the same day, before the folks who are doing the interviewing make any decisions. I remember years ago, I was mentoring a young woman who shared with me her handwritten thank you note that she was about to put in the mail. And I said to her, very classy, it's not going to help you, because I can almost guarantee they've already made the decision. Typically, at the end of the day, after a round of interviews, the interviewers meet and they make decisions. So you want to send an email thank you as soon as possible. That's my first suggestion. The second thing is to be very specific in what you say. Reference your conversation and reference your unique strengths. And last, I want to add this point that your thank you email is your opportunity to add anything that you missed. If you're like most people, including myself, after you walk out of an interview, you start thinking about things that you shoulda, woulda, coulda said. Guess what? Your thank you email is your opportunity to say those things. So write your thank you email immediately, be very specific, and don't forget to add anything that you forgot in the interview itself. Okay, that's it for the checklist. We've covered what to do in advance of the interview, how to prepare, what to do and say during the interview. We've covered how to answer specific interview questions, and we covered what to do after the interview. If you go through all of the things in this checklist, you are going to knock it out of the park. One last reminder, if you're on the job market, I really hope you'll download the interview prep checklist to help you guide your preparation. You can find it at talkabouttalk.com/interview. Yes, I made it easy for you to remember. talkabouttalk.com/interview. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Talk About Talk podcast and leave us a review. I really appreciate it. And by the way, you'll hear me in the next episode when I'm going to be over this cold and I'm going to sound like a normal human. If you know of anyone who's on the job market, please forward this episode to them. I thank you. And thank you for listening. Talk soon.